we used to make money out of recycling. And that money as a city, we don't really keep ourselves. It's really reduce our operating cost and help our residents. And unfortunately, over the last few years, the curve have been trending down. We used to get money from CR&R, $25 a ton. Thank you so much, Bob. But Bob Williams, by the way. Unfortunately, those days are gone. Now we're paying $75 a ton. And so it's really changed that equation. And so today we have a panel of experts with us, who have really been in this industry for some time, and they're going to be approaching it from a slightly different perspective. So we want to start with Brett. Brett Jones, his dad started a great company, City Fibers, in LA. He had 6 MRF at one time. Brett graduated from USC. He started working for the company. Unfortunately, things turned sour. And last year, after we had an agreement with them.
That's an understatement, by the way.
So, last year, unfortunately, that agreement ended with them. But we wanted him today to discuss with you and explain the challenges that they faced. It's really hard, and we saw it in their faces when they had to lay off so many employees who were working at that company. So, Brett, we want to have you kick it off and tell us about how things changed in the industry and what do you think we need to be going from here.
Thank you for having me. I just found out I was going to be on the panel during lunch, by the way, so I'm not very polished, but I'll do my best. Thanks for the introduction, Brett with City Fibers. As Alex noted, we once operated not 6 MRFs, it was 2, and we had to shut them down this past July. And it's true that we had to lay off 117 people, so it's been really, really difficult for us. We're still operating 4 facilities, paper, commercial paper, scrap metal yards, and even that's very difficult for reasons that have been mentioned here today: national sword, trade tariffs, the regulatory climate in California. We have to answer to 4 or 5 different departments: Department of Toxic Substances, State Water Board, Regional Water Board, AQMD. You'd think they'd be on our side, right? Being a recycling company, but they're not. We're subject to regulations like any other company, and most of our property, it's either rented or owned. It's open, so there's a slew of issues there that all the runoff with water, so on and so forth. So it's been very challenging to say the least. Like Alex said, we go back to the 80s. We started with the dual stream recycling, and overnight the contamination rates went from 2% to 22%. And then most recently, our contamination rates were as high as 46, 47%. So it's difficult for a number of reasons. The composition of the stream has changed dramatically. We used to read newspapers, right? At least I did. Now we're on our phones. It used to be 45, 50% of the composition in the blue bin was newspapers. That's now 4 or 5%. It used to be, remember good old telephone directories? We used to throw those out every week, and there was a good market for them. That's gone. We still have junk mail. Well, it's actually called direct mail. Can't call it junk. That's still in the stream. But basically what we were marketing was a mixed paper, combination of newspapers and direct mail. 2 years ago, mixed paper was selling for $140 a ton. Now we're shipping it to the dock for $4 a ton. And our cost to process over the lines is around $120. So you don't have to be a mathematician to do the math on that one. So it's a difficult business. I know that there's an RFP going out. Is that right? Yeah. We weren't invited. I don't know why, but we are interested if the city's willing to help out. We still have property that's there to be used. We have systems that have been mothballed. 2 single stream systems that are probably not very competitive, because with all the new technology that's come out, a lot of it is automated, robots, things of that nature. But if the city's willing to do some kind of partnership, we're very interested in making the investment. But there's a lot of things that need to be considered. The port. If we're gonna continue to be export reliant, things have to change at the port. I mean, our drivers used to be able to do 3 trips a day through the port. Now they could do 1 if they're lucky. Pier pass is costly, so it's challenging. We talk about opening mills here in California. I mean, I'm all for that, but the investment is a multiple 7 or 8 figure investment. And the regulatory climate, we used to run a mill. We used to make brown napkin for Starbucks. And it was very difficult. The sanitation discharge, AQMD, it's very challenging. So, I don't know, I'm just talking on a whim. Do you guys have any questions? I didn't come prepared. I'm better at Q&A.
We'll come to that. But we'll check with Ron and Martin, see, because you were on the list, by the way, invited for our RFP. So I'm not sure what happened there.
Invited to talk, but I didn't know that meant being up front and center. But anyway, it's good to be here.
So our next speaker is Dr. Dan Domonoske. He's been 23 years with Potential, and he's an executive vice president. Dan has overseen the expansion of Potential. Actually, it's one of the 2 MRFs we're currently using right now for our recyclable material. He has helped many cities with their recycling and education program. And so, Dan, you want to tell us about I know Potential had a great relationship in China, sending a lot of materials, and that have changed in the last couple of years. So,
First of all, I'd like to thank Enrique, Alex, and the folks from Sanitation for the invitation to be here. This is a spectacular education center and a great venue, so it's my pleasure to be here on behalf of Potential Industries. I want to talk to you today briefly about 3 things. The first one is an update on markets for recyclable materials. The second thing has to do with the challenges for MRF processing, and then touch briefly on the environmental aspects as it relates to the carbon footprint and global warming and things like that. So Potential has been in business since 1975. We consider ourselves experts in marketing traditional recyclable materials. That would be glass, paper, plastic, and aluminum. And I've been with the company, actually, time flies, it's 26 years now, and I was in the recycling export business for 7 years before that. So I'm an old guy with a lot of experience that lived in China and sold my first bale of waste paper to China in 1986. And at that time, they weren't even buying anything with print on it. They were buying what we call pulp substitutes. So it's been a crazy ride over the last 30-some years as China's gone ballistic and then turned off the spigot. But throughout it all, Potential has been active in the marketing. We're proud to say that we embrace the city's approach to expanding cooperation with Mexico. We supply material to Mexico every month. We supply material in all 3 modes of transportation. We load rail cars, we load trucks, and we also load containers that go down to Manzanillo. On the bright spot of the marketing, I mean, it's been difficult, it's no fun, and this MRF business is challenging. From the marketing side, I am here to report some good news. You saw it earlier if you saw Zoe's slide, which showed a little bump on OCC, which we call cardboard, because in January of this year, it actually bumped up a little bit. In February, it went up even more. So we are hopeful that those mills in Southeast Asia will continue to love our long cellulosic fiber, which they really can't get anyplace else. So there's not a lot of substitutes for old corrugated containers, and we'd like to ship that to Mexico. We haven't sent rail cars of cardboard to Mexico for maybe 15 years because now there's actually more cardboard coming across the border than it is going the other way. But that's it on markets. So next thing briefly, I want to talk about MRFs. Brett mentioned MRF business is not what it used to be, and in California with the regulatory climate, it's pretty tough. In 1987, the MRF industry was looking at this national sword saying, surely they're not serious. They mean unsorted paper. They don't mean they're going to ban mixed paper. And then we kind of could figure out on the plastic, maybe they would stop buying that crap, which they would sort by hand with different recovery rates. In any case, I came up with this little approach called Recycling 2.0. I've actually shared it with some of the people in the room because I went out on a crusade to try to get the suppliers of commingled material from MRFs to do two things. Number one, stop putting stuff in your bin that doesn't have a market. And number two, don't put trash in there and contamination. So that all sounds pretty easy until you get blowback from the special interest groups. But I'll just say I'm a simple guy, BCPC, bottles, containers, plastic, and cardboard. So you got your glass in there, you got your metal, you got the aluminum, got the CRV program, all the bases are covered. Contamination level has been an issue, but just within the last month, it seems like everything's hitting at once. So you got this federal legislation called Recycle, where they want to put money towards improving the contamination. And then you have the Recycling Partnership, which just at the end of January, they came out with the 2020 State of the Curbside. You have ISRI. We heard about them earlier. They are the voice of recycling in the United States, Institute of Scrap Recycling Industry. The board of directors has a meeting tomorrow. And one of the things they're going to vote on is simplifying the acceptable materials for residential single-stream programs. And there's a lot of stuff that's not in there, and I'm really happy because I think it's going to pass. And then you also got the how to recycle. Basically, there's a whole lot of stuff that's coming together right now. I'm going to try to wrap it up here in just like 3 minutes. So MRFing, takes a lot of money. We just upgraded our MRF. It costs $14 million, and that didn't include our beverage container sort line. So it's not as much fun as it used to be, but municipalities that want to recycle with curbside programs, they just write the check instead of getting the check. But what they don't really talk about is they've been writing big checks the whole time, like 60, 70% of the cost is in the collection side. So this stuff wasn't free to begin with. You just kind of notice it more now. So last thing, maybe I'll just tell a quick story on carbon footprint and importance of the environment. A couple of years ago, maybe 5 years ago, I got a call from the EPA, and John Stephen, who runs the LA office, said he wanted to learn about goods movement. I said, why are you calling potential about goods movement? Well, he said, you're one of the largest exporters of containers in North America. I think you're third on the list. So, you shipped over 1.2 million tons last year, export, and we want to talk to you about goods movement. So he came down, and then he also brought Jared Blumenfeld down, and eventually they came back with Gina McCarthy, the head of the EPA, because they wanted to understand the goods movement. And once they understood that a grocery store outside of Phoenix is baling their own cardboard and sending it back to the distribution center in Phoenix in the same truck that brought the stuff there, and that same truck is coming back to Southern California, otherwise it'd be coming back empty, and then they're putting it in an export container in Southern California and sending it back to Southeast Asia in a ship that would otherwise be sucking in water so they could ballast down and get back there, they realized that actually the way the recycling is working when we're exporting to Southeast Asia is not bad for the environment. So I could talk on for a lot longer, but I'm going to stop right there. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Christine Wolfe. Christine heads the government relations for Recology. And as you probably have heard, Recology is putting a ballot initiative. It's polling right now 71%, but better than the other candidates. So you guys are, and I know you're spending over $1 million. Yeah. So Christine, you want to share with us the initiatives, what it is, and what are some of the misconceptions about it?
Well, I'd love to hear what some of your folks' conceptions are so we can dispel those misconceptions. But so I think one of the things we've all talked about is, costs aren't the same and they're probably not going to go down. And if we want to achieve the kind of diversion rates that we're looking at the state level, that is included in the Green New Deal that the mayor released last week, we're going to have to spend money on some of these things, and that's just a reality. And so one of the things that we've all been trying to think about is how can we do that without having the ratepayers, so on your garbage bill, cover all the costs. And so one of the ways of doing this is to try to bring the producers to the table. And the producers, by producers I mean the producers of the single-use plastics that are contaminating our systems. Like we've already discussed, our MRFs were built to sort paper. And that's how our MRFs are built. And we are investing in new technologies. We have optical sorters. We have robotic sorters. All of those things cost money. And a lot of that is to get plastic out of the paper stream. And some of this plastic we can find value for. That's PET, that's HDPE. We've already talked about that today, some number 5s. But for the other plastic that has low value, it's hard to find markets for. I think probably a lot of you saw that Greenpeace report on the 3 through 7s not really having a market in most of the U.S. And I think if you've seen pictures of, what it looks like overseas, there are very robust economies around doing that recycling, but they don't have the same kind of environmental or labor standards that we have here. And trying to figure out how to capture as much material here as possible and build markets for what gets into our stream, as well as also focusing on sort of what our facilities were built for, which is paper recycling. We have to find new revenue streams. And so the intent of the initiative is to capture a revenue stream that's from the producers. So the producers of single-use plastic packaging would be taxed at up to $0.01 per package. So this is an Alex example from earlier, is a good one. I'm going to leave sort of the details up to Zoe and her team at CalRecycle to figure out in regulation, but sort of how it's, okay, yes, I'll take that from you then. For example, if you bought 10 Keurig cups, generally not recyclable, they're pretty small, they fall through our system, and those 10 Keurig cups are in a paper box wrapped in saran wrap. Hypothetically, you're paying 11 cents, or the producer is paying 11 additional cents on to produce that, because they're paying up to $0.01 tax on each Keurig cup, and then also the saran wrap that goes around that. So what's the money for, which I think is what everyone is more interested in, is there's 3 buckets. One is for local governments to take care of some of the costs of cleaning up the plastic pollution in their stormwater systems. I think you were discussing earlier that local governments spend up to $420 million a year on this. And so we want to use some of that money, 20% of the total, to help target those programs, as well as some outreach and education around composting and recycling. 50% of the funds would go to CalRecycle for market development. So that would be sort of back to both the private sector and the public sector to develop some of the things we've been talking about today. I think there's so many things that we talked about. It's really encouraging to get such a diverse set of people here and really understand what it is that we're trying to look at and what the future looks like and to get to the goals that we want to get to. And so that sort of 50% of those funds would be to how can we spur market development both here in California and then get better product if we're going to send it to responsible markets overseas. And then the last bucket, which is 30% of the funds, would go to environmental restoration. So that's coastal cleanups, estuary cleanups, and some of the ocean cleanups from some of the pictures that we've all seen of how it's affecting the wildlife. And I think just, to be candid, I think that I think we need to ride on the wave of the attention that's being given to our industry right now. I don't think that people are going to care about garbage forever. I think the good thing about National Sword and the good thing about China shutting down the markets is that it's shown attention on this. We're getting a lot of press, like you said, Zoe. We're in the press every day, whether that's the bottle bill or something about the plastics market. People are paying attention to the industry, and if we don't sort of capture that energy, I don't think that we're going to have this kind of opportunity in the future to reclaim some of the things that we need to meet the standards that we all want to meet as both here in LA, but also as a state and hopefully other sort of partners across the nation. There are a lot of, like you were saying, interest in the federal bill, a lot of movement in other states to try to look at ways that they can bring producers of single-use packaging to the table, and other ways that we can sort of be creative on the policy side to develop sort of private and public sector solutions that can work together. So that's what we're trying to do with the initiative, and happy to answer questions if folks have it down the line.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is from Public Services, Chuck Helget. He has been in the solid waste business over 20-something years. And so he done legislation, he understands the markets, and I wanted him actually to talk about some of the recycling issues, but also how he see a public role in this ballot initiative that's also coming.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you, Enrique, for inviting us here today. I very much appreciate this opportunity. I want to put a little texture to this. And first of all, I think I'll address the second piece of it. The ballot measure is public policy in place before the voters, and we wish Recology well in terms of getting the signatures collected and getting the ballot measure on the ballot. But there's a lot to be done before that happens in November, and I think I'm going to try to focus my comments more on the legislative aspects of public policy in Sacramento. But I want to provide some texture also to some of the comments that were made earlier today, Zoe's presentation, and particularly bring back to you Enrique's first chart that he showed, because I really think that highlights in many ways everything that we've discussed today. If you look up at that chart and you see that our recycling programs are essentially broken. When the city of Los Angeles is making $4 million 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and today they're paying $8 million to get our recycling programs moving and functional, there's something wrong with that model. Let me go back a little, and I think with Brett's presentation earlier too, it really highlights the problems that we have today with our recycling structure and our recycling system and our funding mechanisms for that system. Domestic markets, again, some background on commodity prices and on our markets. Domestic markets exist today for steel, aluminum, and rigid plastics. They're not paying the prices that they used to pay, but their markets are available. That market has some good value, but that's only 10% of our curbside. 75% of our curbside are fiber-based materials, and primarily old corrugated cardboard, as we've talked about, mixed papers, and office papers. In the U.S. today, and in the past, our efforts on recycling have focused mainly on the supply side. How do we guarantee supply for our recycling markets? The problem is that those recycling programs in the supply side don't exist or don't go anyplace unless we have markets to support them. And I think that's one of the objectives we've had, is we need to fix the backside of this process as much as we need to figure out how to do better recycling. For 25 years, recycling programs in the western U.S. have relied on export markets, and again, primarily for fiber. We have limited paper mills in California and limited paper mills on the West Coast. They're not here, and we're likely not going to be opening any new paper mills in the near future. We're optimistic, but if you talk to paper mills today, what they want is corrugated cardboard. They don't want mixed paper. So we still have a monstrous part of our recycling system that has no place to go. There's been a lot of focus on plastics as well, as there should be. It's a monstrous environmental problem. But again, we need to put that in the context of our recycling system. Plastics weigh basically nothing. Polystyrene is air. Our recycling system is based on diversion and recycling on tonnage. And so if we have to move a bunch of plastics, we're not moving the needle at all in achieving our diversion goals and our recycling goals. Again, it's fiber, it's mixed paper, and those are the commodities that we need to focus on as well. The environmental side of plastics is very, very important, no doubt. But if we're trying to fix the recycling model, we also need to consider what's going on the fiber side. I do have to give one clarification, too, from Republic's perspective. Due to oversupply in the marketplace, when China disappeared, everybody started shipping material to Malaysia, India. Those markets are oversupplied, so what has that done? You've got too much supply, additional downward pressure on pricing. So commodity prices literally have been in the tank for a long time. But one of the things I want to say from Republic perspective, again, is we are continuing to ship mixed paper, mainly into Malaysia and Asia and other countries, but for no value. And the mixed plastics that we have, we're trying to find domestic markets for. Those aren't going overseas from our perspective. And that has shown up in the press at times that all this material is continuing to go overseas. At least from our perspective, on the plastic side, it's not. So stability in markets, then, if that's the critical aspect of this, there's basically three ways to ensure that stability. Less supply, more demand, minimum content. So one of the policy and legislative policy that we're proposing is continued minimum content, minimum recycled content, would go a long way to help in terms of cleaning up markets. To meet recycling goals, and we've got a number of those. AB 939 is a 50% diversion goal, and we still have to continue to meet that. AB 1826 set up a mandated commercial organics recycling. SB 1383, additional organics recycling that's going to have to occur between now and 2025. Very heavy lifts. To accomplish those goals, we're going to need 100 to 200 new composting facilities and AD operations. AB 1383 on the top end, according to Cal Recycle, is going to cost us roughly $41 billion to implement. That's billion, not million. That's a very expensive program. And packaging trends that we've all talked about today are still driving our costs up constantly. Again, a good example with City Fibers. So we need a long-term stable funding source to create markets and to help with offset the recycling costs that we're all confronting today. So again, Zoe mentioned the Climate Catalyst Fund from the governor's budget, and we thank the governor for thinking of us in the budget. I think that's a very important first step. But low-interest loans aren't going to help us a whole lot right now when you've got commodity prices that aren't going to supply a loan, or aren't going to support a loan. And we have pretty easy money right now for the most part. I don't think that's necessarily the answer. That may be in the short term be an answer for some small part, pilot projects or something like that. But we need a stable funding source. And again, this, I think, fits in a bit with Christine's comments about the funding mechanisms that are in the initiative. We have been promoting and continue to promote a small fee on generation, pay-as-you-throw, whatever you want to call it, in combination with some sort of manufacturer or producer-based fee. And we're going to continue to push that. I think Senator Ben Allen is going to be introducing at least a spot bill legislation for us. And so you'll see that legislatively. We hope the initiative passes. It's a lot more money than what we propose. But if you look at all the funding mechanisms that need to occur, we believe we're going to need $400 million in our system every year for 10 years in order to get our recycling program back on track. And that's money for local governments. That's money for the industry to just help create markets and help figure out how we're going to process these materials. I think the last thing that I want to talk about is we have to build these 100 to 150 facilities. Composting facilities, AD facilities aren't going to be easy to site. We're going to need support from the state and from local government to figure out where we're going to put these facilities to handle the materials that are going to be coming out of SB 1383. Finally, I want to note that we support SB 54 and AB 1080, and we've supported them for the last year because we believe that those bills, if adopted, will more clearly require that problematic single-use packaging will be either source reduced, reused, truly recyclable, truly compostable, and that those objectives will help support a more sustainable and affordable recycling system in California. I do want to give a shout out to the mayor's office about pulling some plastics out of the system. Just a quick aside, and maybe close with a quick story. Our facilities, film plastics is a great example. It's less than 4% by weight of our waste stream. I would say it's 70% of our problems at our collection points, at the material recovery facilities, and at landfills. And it's a good example of material that we shouldn't be throwing into our blue bins. We have to sort it out. It clogs up our materials at MRFs. And so that is something that I think is a very important point to make. We need to figure out what truly is compostable, what truly is recyclable, and focus on those types of materials. Thank you.
In post-collection at Athens, in his role, he provides strategic guidance on short-term and long-term for recycling and organic collection processing. Dave?
Good afternoon, everyone. The best part about going last is your colleagues talk about everything that you wanted to talk about, so you're over here crossing things off. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Athens. Athens Services is a family-owned owned and operated facility since 1957, and we're proud partners with LA Sand to operate 3 of their franchise zones here in the city of LA, as well as processing that material, as well as processing roughly 50% of their residential material. And so we appreciate the business with LA Sand, and Enrique and Alex, thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of the plan as we start to move forward. We're a disposal avoidance, diversion-focused organization, so like my colleague up here, we don't own a lot of landfills. But at the end of the day, this is a systemic problem that we need to be focusing on. As we look back to AB 939, it was kind of nice to see some slides earlier talking about 1988, and Chuck and I were talking a little bit before we got up here. Back in when AB 939 went into play, there were domestic options for fiber. You could send products to Oregon. You could send products into Northern California. And what it did, it made the export market honest. And so you had a chance to be diversified in the marketplace. That slowly but surely went away. And as it went away, more pressure went onto the processor and more pressure went onto the jurisdictions that we were serving, because at the same time, diversion goals were going up. So we weren't going the other way. The diversion goals were going up, and the opportunity to move material was starting to reduce into one market space. So as I said earlier, these folks, Dan did a great job of covering all the issues that we have. I got 4 real topics to talk about. One, and as Brett said, it's a difficult market condition. Everyone understands that. They know that. And really what makes it difficult is the expectation on contamination levels. So an eye towards quality and eye towards material standards is something that we are investing in on an ongoing basis to make sure that we can meet the standards of the processor. A need for a domestic option. I'm going to echo that. We need it. We recognize that there's environmental issues around that, but the challenge is until we have a domestic option, we're going to continue to fight the same battles, especially with these things in the fiber markets. And this is a broken record, but I think you can't do enough of it, ongoing education, and really educating folks on what's changing. Things are changing every day in the market space, and I think we kind of go back to the broken record of, well, this is why we're doing it. This is why we're doing it, not necessarily what's changed and how we have to continue to do it. So ongoing education, I think, is a key to continuing this opportunity to be able to get our customer to be able to participate at a level that allows us to meet those standards and get those things out of the system. And so I'll leave this, and I know questions and answers are the best part of this. What got us here won't get us there. And I think that's clear and evident by all the things I've heard this morning and everything I've heard on the panel and everything I know I'll hear this afternoon on innovation, is we need to start looking at what's going to get us to the next step. And getting us to the next step is going to be a lot of smart folks and a lot of people at the table talking about real issues and real opportunities to be able to fix this. So with that, I know they just want to beat Chuck up over questions, so I'll turn it over.
Thank you so much. Okay, if you guys have any questions, please prepare them. But I'm going to ask the first one to Christine. There's been discussion about this ballot will be generating close to $1 billion. One of the things that I heard about this ballot measure is that it does not clearly state on the receipt when you buy a product that what is, like let's say the Keurig example, that 11 cents is going towards this packaging. So this way a customer who's buying it have no clue that they're paying for that environmental. What was the decision behind not including it on the receipt?
Thank you for asking that question, because we put a lot of thought into that. I think most of the recycling fees that we're used to seeing in the industry are consumer fees. So we're telling the consumer you're going to have to pay more for this to be managed properly. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but it puts the onus back on the consumer. And the way that we structured this was so that the fee would be on the manufacturer. And they, we can't stop them from passing that down to their consumer, but if anyone has any ways for us to do that legislatively, we can think of that, but I don't think that there is one. But this is the way to get the producers to have some skin in the game. And if the consumer options are what is the problem? That we talk about this, a especially working on this issue, you try to live a different kind of lifestyle. I'm sure we've all tried this. It's very difficult to avoid buying a lot of this problematic plastic packaging. There aren't options. You walk down the grocery store aisles and there just aren't other options. And so is there a way that we can drive the market towards what's actually recyclable and compostable, so that when we're looking at these things saying, is there a way to incentivize the industry to use paper instead of plastic, maybe in some cases reduce the number of packages that are around certain goods, and this is one of the ways to do that without putting it on the consumer making all of the decisions, because that's not a feasible way to continue on.
Thank you. You know, this Rebecca and Julia will appreciate this. This last couple of days, we took a trip out of town. We were going through LAX. Something caught my mind, because now I'm seeing it more often, is that people were standing outside the water fountain with their reusable filling up water. So this way they didn't have to buy the $4.95 bottle of water. So, yeah, that was kind of refreshing to see. And it's funny because I saw it on the way over and coming back to LAX. A lot of people using it. So today in our audience, we have people from American Beverage Association, Tetra Pak, and Loop Fund, and recycling. So if we can go down, whichever way, we start with Dave, since you were the last one. If you have something to ask the industry, what commitment would you want to hear from them? They're going to be speaking after us.
Wow. I feel like Brett, you got put on the spot here. What would we be asking for? I think from an industry's perspective, we're looking for a partnership. And so too often, this industry and the producers and the manufacturers work in silos. And what we're asking for as an industry is a partnership to be able to work forward as a team to be able to solve these problems collectively. So whether it's Loop or recycling partnership or technology or plastics industry, we want to be at the table. We want to see what works best for you folks so that you can understand what works best for us, so that we can get our customers in line to be able to do that. So I think it's really around growing the relationships to be able to be there. It's been far too long, probably dating back several decades before the groups have really gotten together to solve a problem together. And I think that's what I'd be asking is, how do we work together to solve that problem?
I wouldn't give a pat on the back to Dave. I think collaboration is going to be the only way that we're going to figure our way out of this system. In the past year, we've been working on SB 54 and 1080. I've had numerous conversations with fellow lobbyists from the American Chemistry Council, a variety of people from the producer side. And I think the one thing that keeps popping up in those conversations is, how do we figure out how to fund these programs? I mean, they would like us to be able to pull polystyrene out of the recycling system, but that's going to cause a lot of money at the MRFs to do that. Maybe it's secondary processing that can handle that. But even if that's the case, the value on the backside, again, from commodities isn't there. So it's going to have to be funded some way. And I think right now, I mean, our industry provides funding. The consumers, through the rate base, provide funding. And I guess it's time for us to sit down and have a good and honest conversation about how product manufacturers can be a part of that mix as well. We don't understand your industry. You don't understand ours. So let's get at the table and kind of figure out a way to get this done.
So I'm asking the Tetra Pak, the plastics industry, is that who I'm talking to? Or who's it, right? Yes. In terms of reduction, recycling, reuse, or, right? Well, I mean, we need to switch over to, and this is easier said than done, but switch to alternative packaging. I mean, it's a difficult thing, right? But, I go to the Indian restaurant in downtown, and I go in there and I get my dinner, and I take back my plastic containers, but the owner doesn't want to refill them because it's a health issue, right? We need to change that mentality and just think differently. But first and foremost, you produce different packaging, right? Packaging that at the very least is biodegradable. I think that's the most important thing. And then as far as recycling goes, I mean, it's always a third. It's a cliche, right? Reduce, reuse, recycling. It is difficult recycling plastic because it's not cost efficient to move it, right? So, but I don't know how we would tell the producers what would they change to make it more movable or more transportable. I don't know what the answer is, but from terms of sustainability, just let's try to shift over to, it's a very generic thing to say, but I can't think of what else to say. Switch to a different type of packaging that's more sustainable.
You know, I think that the trend towards collaboration is key. And I think one of the things that's been really encouraging about sort of the last year or 2 years is that as we've dealt with these issues, I've seen so many more coalitions like the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, other folks in that space, Closed Loop Fund, talk about what designing for recyclability actually looks like. And there's classes on this, there's classes on all of these things in terms of actually educating sort of the next generation of packaging manufacturers on what that's going to look like, what packaging of the future is going to look like, so that what gets introduced into the marketplace is recyclable or compostable with our systems. And sometimes with our systems might mean that we need to partner with folks on the back end to develop sustainable markets. And sometimes that might mean switching to a different material type. But if we're not talking to each other and having these conversations, I don't know how we're going to get to that point. And I know that something that drives a lot of these large brands, at least, is the consumer attention on sustainability. I know that folks want to be able to call their product recyclable or compostable. That means a lot. But we also want that to be true. We want, when it says recyclable or it says compostable, we want that to mean that it gets recycled or that it gets composted. So to the extent that we, with the expertise that we all have, can help educate the folks, you folks on that, and that the packaging industry can come to the table and tell us what you need. You know, we're a slightly nimble industry, probably not as much as you are, but we can make changes, and we welcome innovation, and we know that that's going to be a part of sort of the next century of waste management and resource recovery. But until we have those conversations, you know, I'm not sure how we'll do that. I will also say that I don't know anyone who likes soda better in a plastic bottle than they like it out of an aluminum can, though. So I don't know what that was about, but.
I would like to second what Dave said regarding collaboration. That is absolutely the key. It's time we in the industry told the truth and deal with reality. So I would say I have two asks for the special interest groups and the marketeers. Number one, design for recycling. I mean, don't get forced into EPR. Just do the right thing and start thinking about taking into the recyclability into consideration when you're creating the design. The second thing is, if you really want us to sort this stuff, then have a market for it. So I'm interested in sorting things. If there's not an ongoing market, and I don't care if the price goes up to $200 this year and down to $50 2 years from now, there's a market. The product moves. What we don't like is just stacking stuff up or sending it to the landfill that just destroys the recycling credibility within the industry when the public thinks things are getting recycled, but then they find out they're really not. So my ask is an offtake agreement. I would like the people who are generating the products that people buy, if there's no market for it, give me a specification that's reasonable, provide a price that's fair, move the material when I have a truckload quantity, and pay the bill on time. Simple.
Okay, now we're open. Any questions?
We know that the scale of this issue is significant. The state did an assessment just for Senate Bill 1383. They estimated a $40 billion price tag. That's all in for education, servicing the residents and businesses that are going to be affected, and building the infrastructure. We have probably a similar scale of investment needed to account for China National Sword. Assuming that we have some good proposals that both Recology and Republic are working on that'll get some of that funding, what can local governments do, the city and the county, to get you to invest in the infrastructure that we need, both on the recycling and on new technologies?
Well, money's always important. Grants, things of that nature. More education, again, very general stuff. But there's been some comments about, paper mills, domestic paper mills. I think that's a great. Alex and Rick has brought it up in different meetings. I think it's a great idea. As these gentlemen noted earlier, we used to have paper mills here in California. We used to have them right here in Southern California. We used to ship roughly 60% of all our commodities right here. And then slowly but surely that went away. So we need to streamline the regulatory process, right, with sanitation, discharge, AQMD. I'm not asking for a free pass. Just we really need a collaboration between public agencies, regulatory agencies, and in the private sector, right? And weed out the bad players, and work with the good player. We're a good player, right? So we've been with the city for 35 years, and we'd love to open a paper mill in partnership. I'm saying it right now. We'd love to open up a paper mill in partnership with the city or the state, and keep a lot of that here, not ship it overseas. But there's obviously labor considerations. There's capital expenditures, so on and so forth. So the biggest one is education, in my opinion, and investment. Whether that's in the form of grants, publicly subsidized, or things of that nature.
So I'd even back that up just a little bit further and ask jurisdictions to look at their permitting process. I don't know if anybody's permitted a facility lately, but if you want to go through the permitting process, including all the environmental documents, we could talk today and we might open something up in 3 years, 4 years, 10 years. And so what I would ask is sort of jurisdictions saying, hey, we're open for business. You have private industry that's saying, we have the dollars, we want to make that investment. But it's difficult to make an investment when the process to get it up and go, just to open the door, is a very long-standing process. So infrastructure really starts at if we make the investment, when can we get it open? And then from there, are there other ways to entice other pieces of the process, whether that's through grant funding or support and that type of thing?
I think the funding piece of this is very important, but equally important is this whole citing question. And I'll go one step up instead of one step down, and actually look at Zoe on this as well. That we have so many different mandates that have come down from Sacramento that are conflicting mandates to some degree. And Zoe, we've talked about this, so I'm not putting you on the spot. But we have air quality standards that are very valid standards and very important to meet. And we've got air districts that implement those standards. They could really not care a whole lot about the SB 1383 mandate because they've got a different task. The water boards have a very different task, clean water. And somehow, some way, we've got to get people out of their silos, to use an outdated term, and talking a little bit at that regulatory level. Even a small amount of relief on citing down from the state on CEQA would make a difference. And I think, Kobe, bring it back to your lap. That's where we need to get together in our advocacy in Sacramento to deliver that message more effectively, because we have not.
Thank you. Thank you. Doug Walters, Chief Sustainability Officer with Sanitation. It might be more of a comment because in many ways you've already answered my question before I've even asked it, so terrific ESP. But in 8 years, a little over 8 years, we'll be hosting the Olympics here in Los Angeles along with the Paralympic Games. We'll be the first city ever to have so much advance notice, more than any other previous city. And given that so many vendors are going to be coming to service the millions of people that will be participating and attending the games and officiating them, etc., we know there'll be a lot of food and beverage containers coming in, right? So to the degree now the organizing committee is looking to get sponsors to put on this $6.3 billion event without any additional cost to ratepayers. Is there any advice, or, in many ways I want to use this opportunity to underscore the importance of having Los Angeles and all of us who live and work here to really take advantage of this opportunity, to really lead by example. And so beyond, of course, the obvious need to collaborate, how can we utilize technology? How can we incentivize, economic factors to really finally maybe get a break here and really do something big and bold, so that we can, just break up this routine of this downward cycle, which it all seems we're headed toward? Is there a way in which we can all get together and think about how can we really make a big difference? Just a few months ago, Coca-Cola, who likely would be a major sponsor, said they're not going to get rid of their plastic, even if perhaps the city of LA may ban it by 2028, because their customers aren't in favor of it. I don't necessarily believe that to be true, at least in the absence of all the economic and climate situations that we may find ourselves in 8 more years. But how can any of you speak to this, and do you have any thoughts as to how can we really advance this cause to really be a cleaner, greener city?
First of all, I would like to say I don't have a very good answer for you, but I'd like to compliment you on asking the question now, because at least it's 8 years to try to figure it out. But I think your point about collaboration is important. I think that it's a very ambitious goal, and when you think about packaging, then start thinking about AB 1383 having to be implemented by that point in time, and what you're going to have to do with all the food waste that's coming off of that venue. So it's going to be an interesting dilemma. So I would encourage that collaboration starting today.
I think just while you're saying that, I think that's such a unique opportunity to implement some reuse models. I think there are so many reuse pilots that are in really small stage right now, but I think they're attracting a lot of attention. I think we've all seen how much attention Loop has gotten from the media and from investors, and I think to the extent that there are all of these sort of small startups, the Super Bowl had, I think it was reusable aluminum cups, or maybe it was just recyclable aluminum cups. It was recyclable, not reusable. Yeah, and reused it. Yes, exactly, like the reusable plastic bags that we all reuse so many times. But I think in a closed event like that, where you have control over what happens there, and there's going to be people from a lot of different places who have very different understandings of what is recyclable and what's compostable, I think that might be a really unique opportunity to try to pilot some of these reusable foodware concepts. So to the extent that you can get ahead of some of the public health challenges that I think that you were mentioning. I know that last year David Chu passed legislation that would make it easier to have reusable food service ware at events, so like large concerts and venues and things like that. So I think to the extent that LA can try to work on that and see if that's an opportunity to sort of be the first place in California that implements that on a wide scale at a really large event, would make it easier for the rest of the state to follow suit.
I'm not sure where all these venues are going to be, but it's my understanding that some of them are going to take place in Long Beach. I'm not sure if some are in Pasadena or not, but it would be helpful to have a consistent message and receptacles so that regardless of where people are participating in the events, they get something consistent. To me, that brings up the subject of a regional waste shed. One of the complications is in the past, each city tried to outdo themselves by adding more and more crap into the recycling bin. And the hauling and recycling industry, we were guilty of it. Like, me too, I can do that. Sure, put styrofoam in there. Wait, did I just say that? In any case, I think that having some sort of consistent messaging and acceptable materials would be a place to start.
We have a question here, the boss.
So like some of you, I'm a veteran of this industry, but it didn't take me long to figure out how much power you guys have. So I'll tell you this. So, we have had probably 12 different recycling managers in sanitation over the years. And every single time, whenever we wanted to know, well, what is recyclable? And I'm thinking they're going to give me this really comprehensive technical answer as to what is and what is not. Their answer always is, I got to ask the MRFs. I got to ask the MRFs. So it's the MRFs who determine what is recyclable and what is not. Forget our technical presentation. It's these folks. But kidding aside, do you think, because the adaptation, and it goes a little bit to your point, Rebecca, about, you know, how much can we insist on a customer changing their habits if we have invested millions of dollars on education and they're not going to change their habit? Do you think you have inertia in how you are setting your ways? And, you know, you can point to the municipality was you guys, you're not educating your customers enough, or you can point to the manufacturers and they're not buying back the stuff. What about your own inertia? Do you think you're agile enough to adapt?
So, is a recycling professional or just as a consumer? Or
you're a MRF. You're a power broker.
Does somebody else want to take that?
You got the mic.
Adapt to changes in packaging legislation and what is produced, or specifically?
Take something very real right now. You keep saying too high a contamination. Well, because you may not be willing to adapt your system so that it's not contamination. Because you do have a lot of power. All you have to say to my manager over here is say, oh, it's not recyclable. Okay, it's not recyclable.
Right. Well, it's, you ask us if it's, what's recyclable. The MRFs say, well, this is not recyclable. And what dictates that is just the market, natural market forces. Unless it's legislated or subsidized, by the state or federal, like PET is, right? The sort of subsidies, we're dictated by markets. I mean, it's that simple. So, I think we're agile enough to adapt. We're looking for new markets. I mean, we've been, my brother and I, and we travel to different countries and we look for different markets. But at the end of the day, it's these are commodities, right? So there's not a lot of value added. You buy and you sell at market rate, and it's subject to fluctuations, just like any other commodity. So, but we are willing to make investments in capital expenditures, but it's got to make sense, right? We're not going to do it so we could file bankruptcy in a year, but we are open to making changes and adapting.
Yeah, so to that point, I think we are nimble in the case that we are looking at emerging technologies. We are, for those who have not come to the Athens Mirth on Pendleton, you're always invited. We have Max AI, which was the first robotic artificial intelligence sorter, the first one they put out. We have optical sorting. We're constantly looking at ways to better improve the quality of the material that we're receiving to try and reduce the level of contaminants that go out. So, and I'll speak, I spent a couple decades at Recology, so I kind of understand what they do. And they're another company that focuses on diversion-focused disposal avoidance. And so they're making lots of investments too. So as technology comes forward and it becomes practical and reasonable to be able to install, the industry's wide open, and they're looking at that stuff, and we are constantly trying to be better at it, because you're right, the consumer can read every stitch of education out there, and if they don't care, they don't care. But I tell you who does care is their kids, because the kids are the best messengers that we have. But to your point, yes, we are nimble. Yes, we are looking at that. As a veteran and been around 3 decades plus in the industry, to see how quickly things have adapted over the last 10 years versus the 20 years before that on technology, both from collection and processing, is amazing. And to see what's on the forefront is even even more exciting because there's just more and more stuff happening out there that will help us be adaptable to that.